Christian story, after creation comes the fall. Or we might say the stumble and fall, especially so if we think of those two hands reaching out for each other. In creation, God's hand reaches out and invites the world into connection. But that hand representing the world makes a fist, and like the poet Weldon Johnson says, shakes it in the face of God. You may remember those words of the poet, young man, your arm's too short to box with God. And so it comes, the stumble and fall after creation. And it all has to do with a special code word in the Christian language called sin, S-I-N.
I have another what question for you. What is sin?
Well, just what is sin? The word sin has fallen on hard days lately. Maybe it's due to the fact that people thought about sin as playing cards, dancing, going to movies. That's what folk sometimes thought of it in the old days, but it's deeper than that. Actually, the whole world we live in today is shying away from this little three-letter word, sin. Famous psychiatrist Carl Menninger wrote a book, a very important book, a few years ago. In fact, it was called Whatever Became of Sin. You would think that the world being in the mess that it's in, people would face up to the reality of sin. But that's not the case. In fact, that's why Christians have a doctrine of sin. They realize the tendency of all of us is to cover it up. It's very hard to look ourselves in the eye, to face up to who we really are. If we go back to our charter, to the Bible, to get a picture of what this word means, there it is in Genesis 3:5. It's talking about a serpent tempting Adam and Eve to be like God, to play God. Well, what is sin? Sin is playing God. It's looking out for number one. It's putting ourselves at the very center of the universe, putting the creature, you and me, where the Creator should be. Sin at its very heart is self-worship. It's self-centeredness. It's what the Bible sometimes calls idolatry. It's the pride in which we humans play God. This isn't confined just to the early chapters of the Bible. It's there throughout, right to the very center of our Christian story. Perhaps you remember what the old spiritual says about the cross. We were there when they crucified the Lord. Human nature is turned inward. It's shut up in itself. It focuses on I, me, and mine. Its tendency is to play God. Now, this realism is very hard for modern people to take, but there it is in the very second chapter of our story.
How do you sort out the issues of who, what, when, where, and how in the biblical story of the fall?
Well, that's another basic question. Just as we did in the doctrine of creation, so in the doctrine of the fall. We turn to the early chapters of Genesis for the picture of the teachings. And again, just like our investigation of the teaching about creation, so here, regarding the teaching about the fall, we have to be clear about the focus. The meaning of the story has to do, again, with the who and the what, not the when, not the where, not the how. Of course, the Bible uses those vivid images of its own day and age. A special tree, God walking in the garden, two people called Adam and Eve, born about 4004 BC by somebody's calculation. Now, one easy way to avoid the point of this story is to debate these details. And so we've had people called fundamentalists who go at it saying, yes, this happened, no, it didn't happen. Say the modernists who are competing with them. And the result very often is that we lose track of the who and the what of the matter by being preoccupied with this great debate between the modernists and the fundamentalists between when, where, how. The truth is that you and I, the who, are this way, and we've been this way since the very beginning. And the what of the matter is that we too say our no to our Maker and to our neighbor and even to nature. Love God, love our neighbor, forget it.
How is sin mirrored in our behavior?
Well, sin is, as we've said, basically self-centeredness instead of God-centeredness. But it comes in different shapes, different varieties. It used to be said that there were 7 deadly sins. But the Christian church has sorted these out into 2 major versions. One form of sin is arrogance, and the other is just the opposite, apathy. Why? We talked in our discussion about the creation of human beings that there were 2 dimensions to being human. On the one hand, we're made in the image of God and have soul, and the other is that we are creatures immersed in life's changes and its mortality. Now, along these 2 lines, there is a sin connected with our special dignity, our uniqueness, our power, the image of God within us. Going with that special power is the sin of power. It's lording it over others, claiming to be more than we are. When we get power, power of any sort, political, social, economic, physical, moral, spiritual, that power tends to go to our heads. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, as Lord Acton put it. So we throw our weight around. How God deals with this is pointed out very early in the New Testament. Luke 1:52 says, God brings the powerful from their thrones and lifts up the lowly. Keep in mind that this kind of power can even be spiritual and moral. Who were the folk that took after Jesus? It was the righteous, the good people of the day. So our spirituality, our virtue, can itself become a smokescreen for our personal power trip. The other kind of power, the other kind of saying no, is not connected with our strength, but with our weakness. The fact that we are creatures of our bodies, of our weaknesses, of our lack of power. Here, sin takes the form of letting somebody else decide for us, of refusing to affirm what we know is right. A version of this is when we let the materialistic interests take over and the television and the values of society in which we live begin to control us. When we care more about our food, our clothing, our shelter. Or another more drastic form that we see every day is promiscuity and perversion of our God-blessed sexuality. Drugs, booze, anything that deadens our senses and allows us to live in a fantasy world. Selling out to the world can also take the form of refusal to stand up and be counted and to assert things that we know are right, including our own dignity that cannot be violated. So sin can take these 2 directions, arrogance or apathy. And behind them both is this narcissism, this playing God that is in every human heart, a tendency since the beginning of time. Just why we are predisposed to play God, there's no answer for that in the Bible. It's called the mystery of iniquity.